Thank you for coming. I know it's kind of like the lunch break, or we're close to lunch, so we'll try to keep this as lively as possible. We have many people in the panel, and I'm excited to introduce them all to you, and that we are all together, almost for the first time in the same room, and sharing what we did over 2 years with the Offshoreleaks investigation. Basically, we're going to talk about for an hour and a half or so, since we were late, or the previous panel was late. You can count an hour and a half from now, so we'll end up at 1:45 or something. And the idea is that we go through the process of the work we did over 2 years, and that we try to keep it open up for questions too. If you have a very pressing question you want to ask, because it's related to one of the things we're saying, just please raise your hand and we'll just do it on the fly, okay? So I am Mar Cabra, and I'm a project research manager at the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists that you see there. It's ICIJ.org. It's our website. We sell ourselves as the world's best cross-border investigative team because we are a network of 185 reporters in more than 65 countries that work together in cross-border topics. We embarked in this mission of trying to unveil who are the owners of offshore companies, thanks to a leak around 2 years ago. And the people here in the panel have been working in different parts of the project, and we've been working together. Just so you get an idea, this investigation, Offshoreleaks, gathered more than 100 reporters in around 60 countries working together. And also, we had like media partners from like around 50 media partners that if you go to ICIJ.org/offshore and go to reporting partners, you'll be able to see what are the media organizations we work with, starting from, you know, for example, the Asahi Shimbun in Japan, to The Guardian, to IRPI here in Italy, L'Espresso, and other media organizations that you can check in our website. Let me introduce who we have here. I'm going to start from there. So we come here. There is James Ball. He works with The Guardian. I'm lost at what his official title is right now.
Special Projects Editor.
Special Projects Editor. He is a Brit, but moved to the US to kind of leave the Americas, or to explore the Americas. So he'll tell us about, he's basically one of the first people that joined the project. So he can tell us about what he did with the files when they were in very raw format. We also have over there, it's Craig Shaw. He also was involved in a very early stage of the project, working with Duncan Campbell out of Brighton in the UK. And he can tell us how he, out of the UK, found a story that had connections with Italy and also collaborated with Leo here. Then Cecilia Anesi, she is, I'm sure you all know her. She's one of the driving forces behind promoting investigative journalism here in Italy. And she is, what was the official title? Director of IRPI? No? He's the director, and you are? I'm just the legal... well, she's kind of like the president. That's it. So if you have any questions about IRPI, go to her. These guys started the investigative reporting project in Italy, IRPI, and we're going to talk about how they found a Chinese story that had connections, that was in our data, but had connections with Italy and with Spain, and kind of like a global story that had connections all over. With Gianluca, what's your last name? Martelliano. Gianluca Martelliano worked with Cecilia in this story, in IRPI too. And then here we have Leo Sisti, which, you know, he's, I don't know how to describe him. He's like a guy that knows everything about mafia and crime and corruption here in Italy, and has been covering this for many, many, many years. He is going to share all his wisdom with us today on how he actually got into the data, even not being a data person, got into the data and found like very fascinating stories and did even more reporting and published more pages than all of us together. So he's going to share that with us today. And I'm just going to, before we move into how we all collaborated together, I wanted to do a brief overview on what Offshoreleaks is. And basically, as I said, you can check everything online in ICIJ.org/offshore. this is the classic case of an lone wolf investigative journalist getting a big leak. The current director of the ICIJ, Gerard Ryle, was an investigative reporter in Australia. And he started kind of like investigating a weird company that was one of the biggest sponsors of a sports event in Australia. And he thought, there's something weird about here. And he started kind of like digging around and ended up finding one of the biggest corruption cases and fraud scandals in Australia. It was the firepower scandal. And all of a sudden one day, after covering this topic for a long time, and also after even writing a book, he gets a package in the mail. And that package in the mail contained a hard drive with 260 gigabytes of information. Inside there were 2.5 million files that exposed the offshore world from the first time. It basically had information, It basically had information on these two offshore service providers, these two agents that work out of tax havens. Mainly one of them, this Commonwealth Trust Limited, worked out of the British Virgin Islands, these very small islands in the Caribbean. And Port Collis Trustnet sold themselves as Asia's biggest independent group of trust companies for comprehensive wealth administration. And as you can see here, they have an office in every single one of the tax havens in the world. So basically, inside of that hard drive were files of these two companies, exposing who were the real owners of more than 100,000 offshore companies. And I don't know how much you know about tax havens. I didn't know much about it 2 years ago when I started working on this. All I knew is that they were situated islands in the middle of nice places with nice beaches. But they're very important in our economy today. They have a key role in the global trade and a key role in how wealth is being distributed and being managed. Why? Because they offer basically two things. One thing is they offer low taxes or no tax at all, but mainly what they sell is secrecy. So that's why you may know the project by Offshoreleaks, but the original title of the project is Secrecy for Sale. They basically sell secrecy. If you go to the British Virgin Islands and create a company, basically you're hiding yourself and behind, for example, Sunny Sunshine Limited. And then with that company, you can go elsewhere to, for example, create a bank account in Switzerland. And basically that way is more difficult. You're making more difficult for, for tax officers or for law enforcement officials to actually find you. So the good thing about these files is that basically they exposed part of this secrecy. And I was saying that this is a case of a typical lone wolf story, or it could have been the typical case of a lone wolf investigative reporter getting a leak. Gerard could have done this on his own, but he decided that he couldn't do this on his own. He didn't have the expertise to bring it to the, really make the most out of this leak. So when he became director of the ICIJ, he decided to make this an investigation, and so we tapped into our local network of reporters and basically used their local expertise to dig into the data. So the answer of how did we mine 2.5 million files? Yes, we used some nice programs that allowed us to mine all these documents, but we used the local knowledge of our reporters to actually mine it. So for example, ICIJ we divided the list of all the clients of these companies by countries, because there was a way of doing this, associating it to an address. And then we would give Leo the list of all the names that were related to an Italian address. And then Leo would look at them, do his research, or even recognize some of them immediately, because he knows everything about what happens here, right? So it could have taken us forever to do research on every single country, on more than 100,000 clients. It took Leo some days, but distributing the knowledge and distributing the power and collaborating together was kind of like the key to this project. We worked for 15 months on this, not only reporters, but also we worked with programmers. So a very key part of the project was to actually, how do we share this data with the reporters, right? So we basically, what we decided is, we decided at some point they hired me to actually do the research for the reporters and try to distribute small parts of documents among all these reporters, and it was a nightmare. I mean, after 3 weeks, I was like, we're not gonna make it. I'm not scalable. What is scalable technology? So thanks to working with Duncan Campbell and a programmer in the UK called Matthew Fowler, we actually built up an online search system that was secure, that was called Interdata. And basically, that allowed every reporter from every corner of the world to actually search the files, the 2.5 million files, immediately, and to also look at the list of names very easily. Doing that allowed us to basically distribute the power. This is an example of how the database looked like. We had, on one side, we had documents from these companies, so PDFs, emails, photos, spreadsheets, Word documents, and we also had 2 big databases. But either we would distribute these databases and all these files in like 60 countries, and that didn't seem like the most secure thing to do. So we decided to, instead of distributing this, we actually decided to build this. Where is this? Here. If it loads. When it loads, we actually decided to build Interdata, which you see here. A ver, 1, 2. No, it's okay. Magic trick doesn't work. But anyway, you'll see it in a second. So basically, all the reporters, this is how Interdata looked. We basically used a program called DT Search to actually, build it very fast, and Duncan and Matt built it like in 2 weeks or so. So once kind of like this tool was built, the research was much faster, and everybody could work on their own story very easily. We thought that that was not enough, so at some point we really needed to work on the data and to actually show all the connections, because as you can imagine, all these databases were not actually built to be analyzed. They were built to put in 1 client detail, 2 client detail, and so on, and we wanted kind of like to look at the data from the other side. So eventually we ended up building the Offshoreleaks database by working with Duncan, Matt, and some programmers in La Nación in Costa Rica, and the team under the direction of Janina Senini. We collaborated with La Nación in Costa Rica to actually build this, which eventually ended up being a public website that people could look at. Actually, it's offshoreleaks.icij.org. So by basically analyzing the data from the other side, we were able to show in a very visual way how the connections happen and what are the connections. So for example, we could actually go here and say Italy, search, and these are the 100 names of people related to Italy. And we could see, I don't know, let's look at this Rome address, and associated to this Rome address, there's a person called Lucia Pavoni Colasanti, and if we click on it, we could start seeing that she's connected to the Claudius Trust, and then all the people connected to the Claudius Trust, etc., right? And we could see all the connections here of like beneficiary of the Claudius Trust, and all these people, these are all the beneficiaries. All these people, all these names were in secret. They were secret until the moment we did this. So basically, this was a later stage of the project, but we found that doing this and working with the data and make it understandable was very useful to work with reporters. And reporters that are working on the story are working with these now and with the tool we built to search for the 2.5 million files. So I guess when we sent the list to Leo or to Craig, or Craig had access to the whole data, but I guess what I want to move on to is, Leo, you got the list. How did you work? Can you share your experience with us? Sì, just hold on. A ver, 1 second.
Grazie per il senior reporter. Many years, yes.
No, he's very young.
Kidding. Okay. Allora, questo è già stato raccontato, quindi passo sopra. Ecco, una cosa assolutamente da sottolineare, e cioè quando abbiamo ricevuto all'Espresso tutti questi dati, la domanda è Ma questi signori che hanno delle offshore, dei trust nascosti in paradisi fiscali, commettono dei reati di evasione fiscale o no? La risposta è molto semplice. Dopo aver parlato con ovviamente gli esperti, fiscalisti, guardie di finanza, la risposta è stata: beh, bisogna vedere che cosa hanno dichiarato nella dichiarazione dei redditi. Se hanno detto che possedevano questi offshore, nessun problema. Se invece non l'avessero dichiarato, allora l'affare si complica. E in questo caso posso anche aggiungere un dettaglio interessante, cioè che è successo che la Procura della Repubblica di Milano, dopo che l'Espresso ha pubblicato ben 4 puntate raccogliendo circa 200 nomi e esponendo i loro nomi, mi ha interrogato e mi ha chiesto innanzitutto l'origine del database. Io ho risposto a quello che ha detto già Mark Cabra, e cioè che è arrivato per posta a Gerard Ryle, che è il direttore della ICIJ. Quindi loro hanno fatto un'inchiesta, penso che qualcuno sia stato indagato, finora non è venuto fuori niente, ma credo che qualche cosa succederà, per cui lascio un po' di dubbi e vediamo un po' di andare avanti. Ecco, allora questo l'ho già detto, la dichiarazione dei redditi. Questo è, diciamo, alcuni dei giornali, anche questo è già stato raccontato da Mark Cabra, che hanno partecipato all'inchiesta con la pubblicazione di questi nomi. Questo è il testo base che noi abbiamo ricevuto e che era sotto embargo, dopodiché tutti i giornali, come è stato raccontato prima da Mark Cabra, hanno deciso di pubblicare in una certa data, un certo giorno, per tutti uguali, quotidiani e settimanali. Questa è la prima puntata dell'Espresso, l'Offshore parla italiano. Anche qui alcuni dati sono già stati esposti da Mark Cabra. Ho già detto, ecco, vediamo un po' di nomi, perché la cosa interessante è questa. Abbiamo detto circa 200 italiani beccati con le offshore. Chi sono? Questo è molto interessante. Un professionista dello studio del ministro delle Finanze, Giulio Tremonti. Lui si chiama Gaetano Terrin, e io l'ho intervistato e devo dire che gli ho dato la caccia per molti giorni, direi un paio di settimane, e non si faceva mai trovare. Alla fine ho dovuto usare un sistema che è abbastanza comune, anche se mi dà un po' fastidio, e io ho detto alla segretaria: scusi signorina, ma stiamo per andare a fare la pubblicazione di questo articolo importante in cui si parla di questo avvocato Terrin, che si chiama Gaetano Terrin, e quindi è bene che lui mi chiami, perché sennò il suo mi uscirà e non ci sarà la sua dichiarazione, il suo commento. Mi ha chiamato subito dopo 2 minuti, evidentemente il sistema funziona, e quindi gli ho chiesto come mai avesse una funzione, si chiama di protector, cioè uno di custode di un trust in questo caso, che si chiama Claudius Trust, che prima ha citato Mark Cabra. Era molto imbarazzato, mi ha detto sì, è vero, l'ho fatto a nome di un finanziere americano che è un amico, il quale a sua volta, tanto per dirla giustamente, è stato messo sotto inchiesta dalla SEC, che è l'organismo di controllo della borsa americana, per gli affari poco puliti che aveva combinato in passato. Quindi questo signore ha detto sì, è vero, io ero il protector di questo trust, non ho fatto niente di male, eccetera. Io ho chiesto: ma scusi, ma lei, siccome lui era dipendente dallo studio Tremonti, che allora, quando venne fuori la questione del trust, non era ancora ministro delle finanze, l'ha diventato dopo. Tremonti è un grosso studio di tributarista a Milano, dei più grossi d'Italia. E io ho chiesto: ma l'onorevole Tremonti è al corrente di questo? No, l'ho fatto per conto mio. Allora ho chiamato l'onorevole Tremonti, il quale mi ha confermato: no, io non ne so niente, il dottor Terrin ha fatto lui questa iniziativa, proprio non ne so niente. Io sono rimasto con alcuni dubbi, ma comunque questa è una cosa che riguarda soltanto i miei dubbi. Ecco, chi altro c'era nell'elenco? Un hacker famoso, che si chiama Fabio Ghioni, perché era stato arrestato e poi in seguito condannato perché aveva fatto, lo chiamiamo il dossieraggio, cioè lui si era messo a costruire dossier illegali su 4.000 persone, tra giornalisti, politici, imprenditori, eccetera. Tra l'altro è rimasto famoso perché lui, come capo della security della Telecom Italia, credo obbedendo degli ordini, perché queste cose non sono mai venute fuori esattamente, aveva hackerato dei computer, tra l'altro quello di un giornalista del Corriere della Sera, Massimo Mucchetti, che era con me all'Espresso prima, poi è andato al Corriere, e che adesso è senatore della Repubblica per il PD. Poi ci sono industriali friulani, uno che non conoscevo, poi ho visto che aveva venduto la sua società per 100 milioni di euro alla Coin, quindi un personaggio. Ci sono tantissimi di questi personaggi in Italia che nessuno conosce, che sono ricchissimi, ma che possedevano, secondo questa inchiesta, delle offshore. Poi abbiamo due VIP, li abbiamo chiamati così, della piazza finanziaria milanese, sono i fratelli Severnini, che probabilmente al grosso pubblico non dicono niente, ma io, avendo una memoria così da elefante, perché mi sono occupato di Sindona, dai miei primi articoli sull'Espresso, ricordavo questo nome. Ebbene, questi due, che si chiamano Severnini, hanno uno studio che era stato fondato dal padre, dove aveva lavorato l'avvocato Sindona, poi coinvolto nel grande scandalo, era il banchiere del Vaticano, bancarotta, morto per aver preso un caffè al cianuro nel carcere di Voghera. Quindi anche qui scandalo nello scandalo. Poi abbiamo trovato due giovani siciliani su cui la procura di Catania ha investigato per questioni mafiose. Poi il discendente di una nobile famiglia che è il Turmum Taxis. Molti non sanno che questa famiglia ha fondato il sistema di distribuzione della posta in Europa. È uno dei pochi che mi ha detto sì, è bene, sì, è vero, ho aperto questo offshore, mi è servito per alcune operazioni commerciali e basta. Quindi è stato anche abbastanza sincero, perché molti negavano. Ad esempio Ghioni, che ho citato prima, l'Acre, ha detto no, io non so niente di questa offshore, anzi mi faccia sapere come si chiama. Io gliel'ho detto, sì, però c'è il suo passaporto lì nella scheda che la riguarda. Ah no, senz'altro è un errore, non c'entro niente. Ecco, questo è un elenco dei cosiddetti italiani eccellenti. Adesso vado avanti. Poi, ecco, questa è una storia molto interessante e a questo punto introduco quello che poi dirà il collega Craig Shaw inglese. Mi ha stupito molto di trovare tra questi nomi eccellenti uno dei primi negozi di gioielleria di Milano, Pederzani, una famiglia che si tramanda, credo, da 2 generazioni. Per esempio, vendevi gioielli a Berlusconi, tanto per dire, ma anche alla famiglia Augusta, cioè era un VIP della gioielleria. E scopro che ci sono tante società intorno, ecco qui c'è l'elenco delle società, come vedete è proprio una specie di intrigo, anzi una cosa intricata. Ci sono qui dentro nomi delle società che fanno capo a un trust con l'elenco di beneficiari, tutti italiani, tra questi risultava dalle famiglie poco conosciute, Camurati, ma soprattutto c'era Cristina Augusta, che era la nipote di uno dei fratelli Augusta, quello degli elicotteri. Tutti li ho sentiti, tutti hanno negato. Qual è il busillis della questione? È che questo trust, che era gestito da un avvocato inglese di cui poi parlerà Craig Shaw, Pearson, lui gestiva questo trust per conto di una signora che si chiama Silvana Inzadi, che però dopo qualche anno è morta e quindi c'è stato questo grande mistero. Lei ha costituito il trust probabilmente per custodire un patrimonio delle famiglie che a lei facevano capo e quindi, essendo morta, non si è mai saputo che cosa è successo di questo trust. Secondo me un patrimonio è stato nascosto, però non lo posso provare. In ogni caso sono venuti fuori dei nomi interessanti. Questa è un'altra scheda relativa a quell'intreccio societario che vi ho detto prima. Altra cosa interessante, e questo aggiunge un mistero a un altro mistero, e cioè abbiamo trovato nell'elenco di questi beneficiari delle 3 società, fondazioni caritatevoli, che sono l'Unione Italiana Ciechi, il Centro Bambini Maltrattati e la Lila, cioè Lega Italiana per la lotta all'AIDS. Tutti sono stati sentiti da me, cioè i loro rappresentanti, hanno negato di avere dell'offshore, anzi hanno negato di essere i beneficiari di questo trust, anzi hanno detto se ci devono dare dei soldi ce li diano, perché se ci spettano ce li diano senz'altro. Che cosa è successo? È successo che per motivi fiscali probabilmente questa signora Inzadi ha infilato dei nomi a insaputa delle persone che vengono definite beneficiarie e quindi probabilmente per ragioni fiscali, cioè per far vedere all'esterno che si trattava di fondazioni caritatevoli e quindi non dovrebbero pagare le tasse. Ecco, il problema è sempre quello, cioè non pagare le tasse. Io credo che abbiamo praticamente finito. Ecco, poi c'è Chinaleaks, ma di questo parlerai dopo. Chinaleaks. Ok, finito. Credo che debba parlare Craig Shaw adesso.
Yes, so basically position yourself. This was happening in like beginning of last year, right? January this year, 2013. January 2013 also, all the reporters had access to these files through a searchable search engine that was accessed securely, the one that I just showed you. And Leo was working here, Craig was working in the UK, and some other reporters working in other places. And all of a sudden, because we did have a forum online also to share our findings, and we knew who was working on this project, all of a sudden Craig finds a connection with Italy, and they came to work together, right? So sharing was a big part of the project, and having a forum, for example, a secure forum, was very key to that. And the initial work with the data and the secure forum were actually developed by another person, a reporter, data journalist in Germany called Sebastian Mondial. So see how all these pieces from different parts of the world are fitting together. And there he was, Craig, finding a connection to Italy. So tell us about that.
Hi. Firstly, it's extremely hot here. That's why I'm all sweaty. So I came into the project slowly from pre-summer 2012, maybe June time. And James and David Lee were already well underway looking at the data. And for everybody else, it was still a complicated process. And Ma, as she said, was trying to manually extract data based upon countries to export them to people. So it was, this was before Interdata. But I came to be involved with Leo. I worked with Duncan Campbell, and Duncan was the data manager for the project to try and take this 260 gigabytes and turn it into something that you can read, because you can't do it linear. You can't do it that way. And eventually I spent time looking through the data, searching it, and we got our first hint of the story through a charity. And it was an Australian AIDS charity, was listed as a beneficiary on a trust in the BVI. And initially we thought perhaps somebody at the charity might have been skimming off the top. And it was a very complicated story, and it led from, there was a doctor in Australia, an American doctor called Dr. Ziolkowski, and he had set up this trust in the latter half of the 90s, just after he was about to be dismissed for bilking Medicare, for overcharging patients for unnecessary treatment. And he'd been warned about this numerous times, and just before he volunteered his license, he set up this trust. I think it was in Bermuda, firstly, and was moved to the BVI. And sometime in 2001, he then began listing two AIDS charities in Australia as beneficiaries. And this trust essentially had no assets. It was worth like $11, but the shares were it owned shares in two companies, two BVI companies, which he used to trade. And he was quite a successful trader. They had a few million in there, and obviously some of this money had come from him bilking Medicare or Medicaid. And we found out that I went to Offshore Alert, I think that was in November, and spoke to a tax expert and said, why would somebody put a charity as a beneficiary on a trust? And he said, well, there's a rule that anybody who has less than 10% on a trust, they don't have to declare their beneficial interest. So he had these two charities which owned 97% of these trusts, and they were listed as the beneficiaries, so he didn't have to declare to his Swiss bank account that he he owned the funds, the companies which we used to trade. And allegedly it's an old scam, a Red Cross scam or something, but it had never really been reported before. So we went looking for other charities, and this was a really interesting, illustrates how the data worked, at least for me. As you started out with kind of one idea or one story. I mean, this went on over several months. I mean, it was extremely complicated because when I started, I didn't know anything about, I had a slightly better than normal knowledge of world economics or whatever. But I knew really nothing about offshores, and so you're trying to learn it at the same time. And that's incidentally one of the fun things about doing investigations, is that each time you start from scratch and you learn something new until you become better and better and an expert or whatever. So we started looking at charities, and I think the next one we found an AIDS charity in Milan. I don't know if it's in Milan, but it's an Italian AIDS charity. And as Leo pointed out, there was maybe there was 7 charities or something like that listed on this trust that was owned by this Italian woman. And this was, I did that because I couldn't mentally picture it. So I had to sit and just visualize it. We didn't find any assets. I mean, there's suspicions that it held millions. But he came into this because of where is it? Oh, I can't see it. Because of one of the charities. And I went to Leo. Duncan Campbell had worked with Leo several times, and they knew each other, and he said, write to Leo, he's a good guy. And so we started working together on this, and I sent him all of the lists and this diagram, and then he would go away and do the groundwork and send back all these long emails explaining this kind of soap opera of this family. And he would go and visit the buildings. I mean, that's what was the beauty of doing cross borders, because nobody was ever going to pay for me to just have a holiday in Milan or whatever. So the fact that Leo was already there is the point of cross-border journalism. But this story again led us to more. And I think the guy the introducer, I think, is the term that they use offshore, or the master client, is the person who you would go to somebody in London, say, they then go to the corporate service providers in the BVI. And these intermediaries have a lot to answer for. And there was one guy called James Pearson. I came across James Pearson. And he's in Marylebone in London, a London-based lawyer. And he had set up this trust in Italy. And it was a similar scam to the Dr. Ziolkowski. But he was buddies with another guy called an Irish lawyer who was part of something called International Offshore Services Group. And basically, if you are skimming money out of Russia, like, this company is the company you want to use. And so all of these things were connected. And I did more stories and worked with Stefan Kundia. But all these stories this is how it worked, and this is how the data worked for you. I mean, since, I think maybe we did 12 stories, and one in The Guardian, and some in Australia, and then Sunday Times, and then L'Espresso. And when Offshoreleaks published, everybody was extremely excited, and I got phone calls, and it was this Pandora's box. And it really didn't work that way. You can't I mean, Leo asked me at one point, he's like, I can't find Berlusconi's offshore companies. I was like, well, they're probably not there. So you had to work with the data that you have and not what was called wish listing, putting in the, I mean, everybody does it. You put in the names of the people you most want to find. You work with the data that you've got, and we did a lot of stories based upon that, and nobody before had ever written that charities were being used in this way. And I don't think it really made that much difference. I don't think there was any change in law, but at least there's an explanation for it now. So then Offshoreleaks launched after, I think, The Guardian had already done some stuff, and then they read it in April. And I'd already worked with Leo, and then I went to Data Harvest and met Cecilia, and then she became involved in what would be Chinaleaks. Have I spoken about the right amount or too much?
Yes, you're
okay.
great, and actually great lead into letting James talk about everything The Guardian did. Because all these dots that you see in this map are countries we covered thanks to the work of people like Leo or like Craig that did local reporting. Because everything started with a leak, but the leak was just the beginning. We had to do normal reporting, found out court documents, knock on people's doors, and it required a massive amount of work. We published all together, or almost all together, almost the bulk of the work was published in April 2013, and the beauty of it and the power of it was that we published all at the same time, over the 3rd or 4th of April 2013 and throughout a couple of weeks. But it is true that if there was one media partner that believed in this since the beginning, was The Guardian. And David Lee and James Ball were actually one of the first ones to get hold of the data, work with the physical data, and actually they published a sneak peek of what they found to be the very best at that time of what they found in the UK. And that was a bit earlier in November 2012. And then they kept on, they published some more in April 2013, and they even came on board on the second phase of the project, which I want to introduce before moving this to James, which is, if you look at this map, which actually you can search, look at it in our website, or if you go to offshoreleaksmap.icij.org, as you see, we're very creative with subdomains. And basically, you can actually click on where are the clients. It's not working. It's not. Just hold on. It's the internet. It's not.
Festival Wi-Fi in action.
See, no, but it's not showing them up. Well, if you do it at home, do try it at home, please. And basically, you would be able to see what's the concentration of the clients. And as you can see and remember, one of the sources of the data was this wealth management provider in Asia. So a lot of the clients came from China, Hong Kong, and Taiwan. That was a massive amount of names. There were like 37,000 names or so. So basically, we decided, and since it was like dealing with China, dealing with a complex world, dealing with names that were written in Pinyin, like in our characters, but we needed to find out if they were the real people by working with Chinese reporters. We decided to do that in a second phase of the project. So after we launched, we started in April 2013, we started working locally with reporters in China, Hong Kong, and Taiwan to actually untangle who were the people, important people behind those 37,000 names of that region. And we launched a second phase of the project and another wave that we called Chinaleaks, that was launched in January 2014 in many media around the globe, including The Guardian. And for example, we not only produced stories, but we also produced, for example, this interactive together, where we showed who were the main faces of the people we found to be in our data. As Craig was saying, we had to work with what we had. We didn't have the president, but we had the brother-in-law of the president. We had the son of the former premier. We had the son-in-law and the son of the former premier. We had all these other people connected to the red novelty in China. We had around 16 names of very rich people in China. So that allowed us to expose the B side, or the hidden side of the Chinese communist, how the Chinese communist elite operates, and the connections to the offshore world. So The Guardian jumped on board there. And I really think having a media partner like The Guardian is key when you do these cross-border collaborations, because when then you knock on other people's doors, and I'm talking here by personal experience, and you said, you know, The Guardian is on board, they actually listen to you much nicer. So James, tell us about all the work you've done on this investigation.
So, hey, good afternoon, everyone. It's a very strange organisation to work for, The Guardian. It's kind of one of the biggest news organisations in the world now, but it seems to sort of be somewhere that the more legally complex, institutionally complex in any kind of way, sort of, it just jumps foot first straight into trouble, which is a fantastic place to be if you're an investigative reporter. So we kind of came on this incredibly early. None of those brilliant tools for reporters that you can see were built when we started. So we essentially got this hard disk and a kind of, good luck, guys. And so I think in a lot of ways, we kind of served as a bit of a guinea pig or the canary down the mine on this story, and kind of a lot of our early fumbling around sort of let the ICIJ and Duncan and Mar learn a lot about how to work with the other institutions, and so I'm very glad we could help them that way. So what we did essentially, it's kind of very different having a big newsroom and a big organisation behind you versus, you know, a lot of people in ICIJ are freelancers. And sometimes that makes it more difficult for us, but usually it helps us. So me and David Lee are both ICIJ members. We pulled in another guy who's sort of a specialist, and we actually used a kind of, it's like a legal analyst's tool. So we didn't use Interdata, and because we spent 4 months using our particular tool, I don't think we ever really used it because we got set in our ways. But it's essentially, it was a tool called Nuix, which is used by lawyers sort of managing very complex cases with millions of documents. And so it was pretty much perfect for us. We actually used something very similar on the Snowden material, as it happens. So lessons from this actually very much transferred to all of the Snowden reporting. And we started really by kind of a bit like Craig was talking about. You know, our editors were sort of saying, oh, well, you know, have you got politicians, have you got this, have you got that? And we sort of had to say, look, no, it is the biggest ever leak of this offshore information, but it's still 2 companies out of dozens and dozens. And so we're not going to be able to do this kind of wish list. And we knew we'd started quite early, and so we ended up sort of talking with ICIJ, and we came up with the idea that because we'd spent a lot of time, we were a bit ahead, we would sort of try out some UK-focused stories ahead of time and see what happened. And then we would also come back on and join the main thing 6 months later. The upside for me on that was that it meant I got a trip to the Caribbean. So I got to visit the British Virgin Islands, I got to visit St Kitts and Nevis, and the sort of downside of it was I was in a fairly small backpackers hostel, none of the private resorts, and it had roaches, and there was an earthquake, and all the roaches came pouring out of the wall. The glamorous, glamorous world of investigative journalism. But I mean, the slightly bizarre thing of this was we got very interested in the people who kind of enable this. And it turns out there's a little gang of mainly British people who serve as nominee directors. And actually, I really should sue The Guardian, because how much does that make it look like I'm one of the sham directors that we're exposing? And so we found this one couple in particular. They used to do this. Essentially, they pretend that they own or control a company and then sign a secret agreement saying that they'll only do exactly what the real owner tells them. And so they just make these people totally invisible. We found this amazing couple who'd sort of travelled from the Channel Islands by Britain to Nevis, and they were supposedly the controller of about 2,000 companies, including kind of online gambling, pornography. I think they were actually involved in one of the weapons companies that we looked at. And we sort of decided to frame part of this around the hunt for Sarah Petramiers, as she was, which sort of led me to this sort of Nevis, which is this sort of 5-mile across rock in the middle of nowhere, and trying to find her house, because we had her address, but none of the streets are marked, you know, let alone no house numbers, there's no street names. So after about 2 days on this tiny place, I sort of finally find the place, and she's not there. And I kind of get in the process of wedging a right to reply letter through her door, like through her gate, big chained gate, which we actually did find out she got. So, I mean, you know, we really put the extra mile in giving these people a chance to respond. When a dog jumps over from her fence and bites me. And as we came to get towards publication, we'd done the straight news piece, but I was doing a kind of Finding Sarah journey through, and we kind of find line by line from the lawyers, because there were a huge amount of legal stresses on this, including that this was information from inside companies, and therefore we had commercial confidence, we had libel, we had all sorts of really complex issues. We went over line by line by line. We got everything in that we wanted, except for that one line about the bloody dog, because we couldn't prove it was hers. So it was a very sort of interesting role to sort of serve as the test for this, you know, to see what some of the issues would be, to see if we'd be able to publish without people then trying to seize the data or shut us down. And I hope that kind of helped the rest of the reporting. But then we came right back in. You know, we kept on it. We sort of dipped in and out and sort of really benefited from all the work that people did in Italy, you know, in Spain, all across the world for the April 2013 big launch. But then we really kind of came back for the China side of things. And, I mean, it's a sensational story, but we have correspondents on the ground there, and so we had quite a lot of concerns. We also, until January 2014, had 400,000 Chinese Guardian readers, or Guardian readers in China. And we published, this is our version of the printing story, and we really, you know, we owe a huge debt to the ICIJ and the months of work they put into this, but we kind of had to do all of our own due diligence. We cross-checked everything. You know, this was a several months reporting project for us. And of course, within 5 or 6 hours of it being published, The Guardian was completely blocked in China, the ICIJ was completely blocked in China, Le Monde, everyone just got entirely blocked. I mean, China, there's a lot of things you can report there. We sometimes exaggerate some of what is and isn't reported there, but they try not to block Western media because they're aware it looks bad. They'll block individual articles sometimes or slow the page. We have been completely, without break, blocked in China now for 4 months. I'm very pleased to work for a news organisation that almost wears that as a point of pride. I actually, passing trivia, I think The Guardian is the only website possibly in the world that's blocked both in China and on US military bases, which is a nice 2 for 2. And, but no, so it's kind of a very interesting thing to kind of jump in first as sort of the pilot in the test case and hopefully trying to test out some of the waters for ICIJ, and then coming back on for phase 2 and really benefiting from all of the work that they've done relentlessly in this meantime. I think just my last thought on this is, however difficult you think collaboration is, it's harder. A kind of a token example of it is a launch time. The Guardian has a printed newspaper that kind of has to be finished for about 7 p.m. UK time. We have a website, which frankly we care about even more than the paper, which has an equal audience in the US and the UK, so we want to launch it at a time that's relevant to them. You then have weekly or fortnightly magazines. You have publications that come out in the afternoon. You have, like, the intricacies of agreeing a go time are amazing. And that's maybe the most simple thing that you do. The other thing is, challenging the rich and powerful is really hard. And we have had a lot of time in rooms with lawyers, and the ICIJ, the Guardian, and other people are still now actually being sued over these stories. And that's incredibly expensive, incredibly demoralizing and exhausting. And you should never, ever let that put you off, because if you do, it's worked. And so the more that we can do to make sure that independent journalists have legal protection, that our countries have libel laws that protect freedom of speech, and that we do what we can to support even rival journalistic organizations when they're under legal assault by the rich and powerful, I think is a very, very important thing to do. And yeah, I'll end it there.
Thank you, James. James was bringing to the table the legal challenges to this. And just so you see, I mean, where do I have here? Even when we published all these names online in the Offshoreleaks database, we always had to have this legal disclosure over there, which kind of was very importantly highlighting that there are legitimate uses to offshore companies and trusts, and that having an offshore company or trust is not illegal. As Leo was highlighting before, what is illegal is not to report it back. But that is the challenging part, because normally tax information is not public. So that is where the reporters were adding added value to this. And these data you've seen, Leo was talking about people here in Italy, hacker, people in the UK, in Australia, these nominee directors. There were many, many topics. I even found myself a Van Gogh in the middle painting, in the middle of the documents, and how one of the Spanish biggest art collectors was actually using these offshore structures to manage her private collection, that you can actually see if you come to Spain to one of the big museums, the Thyssen Museum, right? So we had many different topics. And all of a sudden, one day after, a bit before publishing Chinaleaks, there was this email in the global listserv. The Global Investigative Journalism Network has a listserv where investigative reporters just throw questions and connect. And there was an email from Cecilia, which I knew, but I all of a sudden saw her email, and she was saying, hey, we have a story that connects China, offshore, and Italy, and some connections to Spain too. So I opened up that email, and I thought, oh my God, we're working on China, offshore, I'm from Spain, we need to talk. So after seeing that, we started collaborating with IRPI to actually mine part of our data, work with the data they had actually got, and found this story about one of the most powerful, it used to be one of the world leaders in solar energy. It was called Suntech. It's a big company that was publicly traded in the US, and there she was in Italy finding all these connections to China, Spain, passing through the US. And Cecilia and Gianluca are gonna tell us about how they found that out, and how they ended up finding all these global connections.
Maybe I can even tell you what to open, if that's fine. We just have a question about which language we should use, as you wish.
How many Italians are there in the room? Can you raise your hand? Sorry, Italians that only speak Italian. Italiano? And all that understand English, can you raise your hand? So it's better to do it in English?
Okay. We're actually happier because we've worked in English on the story, so I was already freaking out about thinking Italian words to use. So if you can, first of all, if you can scroll, that's our website, and that's where we put all the different bits of stories that we covered. They're in different languages. They're in English, they're in Italian, they're in Spanish. And the main story is at the bottom, and is the story that was published on the ICIJ website and on the International Business Times. And I don't see it. I have to, hang on.
It's better if we
maybe, yes.
move.
Sorry. Because there is a few documents to open. Just one.
Musical chairs.
This is the game of the chairs.
Game of Thrones.
Yeah, Game of Thrones, yeah. So add some action to the panel.
Before we actually go into the story, Gianluca is also going to explain exactly what we found out and what was the investigation. I would want to start with like the very first things we did with Mar and with Mike Hudson, who was basically the editor ICIJ gave us. And I really want to thank him and Leo as well, because without these two men, we wouldn't have not be able to do all this research, because they really followed us step by step, which in some cases meant 15 Skype calls per day, 100 emails, and even not sleeping at night because of the jet lags we had between America and Italy. So I would really say that without their guidelines, we wouldn't have started all that. And the very first steps, like as Mar said, we already had a story, but it was quite a small story. We knew there was a company investing in Italy. It was from China, and we knew that it was a fraud because we had found some stuff about that. But we didn't know anything about the offshore other than the fact that this company had opened up a Luxembourg-based fund to control all the venture and investments in Italy. But because they were mainly interested in China as how is China using the offshore, the first things that we actually try and do is are they using the British Virgin Islands to do something? And we start using the database the ICIJ guys had built, the Interdata, to look at all the funds and trusts or even just normal BVI companies that could be related somehow to Suntech. And the very first thing we got was like a long list of names that we needed to make sense of. And because we're talking about secrecy, already we have been talking about secrecy used by Italians and by people in the UK, but when we get to China it's even worse because you're mixing secrecy with secrecy. And it was really hard to try and make sense of how to find, I mean, we never worked in China before, we don't know Chinese. How do you find on Google names that are from Chinese? How do you make sure that what it's there on your database can actually be what you're looking for? And I just want to show, like, this was the very first notes we started having. Like, even writing down Chinese names wasn't easy for us because that's something, yeah, to us is like all the same. And we had to, what is the Zhang family trust, the Chen family trust? I don't even know how to pronounce them. So that was a very first step of difficulty. And I even asked help to some friends, some journalists who work in China to just, Italian journalists who work in China to just like make sense of, do you know these people? Like, are they anybody? And no, apparently they were nobody they were not linked to like important politicians or important entrepreneurs, but they were all connected to Suntech, most of them. And as you can see here, we started kind of writing down with different colors what we could find by crossing different sources, and most of them was even found on Google just by using us in research. And and yeah, when we could find something on Suntech, we'd just go with like Suntech, and stuff like that. And then we had a main company, Managed Corp, that is a company used by Percalis, one of the main offshore provider of the BVIs. And as we could find them belonging to Percalis, we would just like green sign them. And from these very first notes, we got to this interesting list of all the, let's see if I can get into that. Yeah, okay. All these trusts and companies were all requested. We found an interesting email with a Pricewaterhouse asking for Percalis to open a number of trusts and companies. So we thought, okay, so there must be, if we check Pricewaterhouse, and Craig was really useful in giving me advice on that, then you're going to find all the trusts connected to them, and you're going to make sure whether those trusts that were quoted on the email without being mentioned were actually the trusts you had on the list. And that was another step we did. And we colored them in different colors on Google Drive, and there you go. And those that we, like this one, the Zhang family, we figured out it was like one trust split it into 3, so you're talking about the same structure. And then from these, we needed to make sense of a large amount of data, and therefore, we went into, I miss a document? Maybe it's, well, I missed a document, the Word document. Well, anyways, I'll just say it. And then we went into a Word document Gianluca and I were sharing, just on Google Docs, writing down all these trusts. And every time we would find something, is it on Suntech? So we put a yellow. And if it was a trust, and then if it was an LTD company, we would put it green. And all that we weren't sure about, we would just put a pink. And by going and continuing that way for a few weeks, at the end, we came up with this synthesis that is like the evidences we hang down to Mike, our editor, and say, okay, Mike, this is what we came up with. And we could prove that all these people had a director that was somebody, either they had like a director role in one of Suntech's companies, or they were in the board. They had some role in different countries. And at the same time, well, that was easier. And then the second level was proving the trusts. All these families, we don't know nothing. We haven't identified who are these families. Maybe one day it would be nice to have some Chinese help from in identifying who they are. But most of them had some characters inside that had a role within either Suntech companies in the BVIs or in other countries. So that's how we worked on trust. It was, I think it was nice to show how we finally got there, yet we know nothing about it really, because you're dealing with China. And from then on, we wanted to prove all the rest of stories on how the offshore was used to invest in Italy and, according to Italian prosecutors, be involved in one of the biggest frauds linked to solar energy in the world.
Okay, just to summarize in a couple of words, our story is just about a huge Chinese company that deals with the solar industry. It was the world leading solar panels provider, and they decided to invest a lot of money in southern Italy in order to produce solar energy. What they did is that they ended up in a series of fraud that in the end made them go bankrupt. This is a really simple story, and this is what you read perhaps on newspapers and so on. But behind this, it's chaos. It's totally chaos because, we can say China, Italy, and stop. No, behind China and Italy, there are several countries that stretches from the British Virgin Islands, as Cecilia said, to the Cayman Islands, to Malta, to Luxembourg, and so on. So let's do a step back and let's show the chaos. Could you please show everything? Yeah. Okay, so I talked about one Chinese company investing in Italy and so on. Now, yeah, thank you. The characters are just more than 2 or 3. These are the characters of the story. The gray spots are the Italian companies bought by the Chinese companies via intermediaries. Actually, even the Chinese company is not exactly a Chinese companies. It used to be. They were based near the Yellow River in eastern China, but actually, in 2005, they decided to set up a holding in the British Virgin Islands, and then after some months, they decided to go to the Cayman Islands in order to go to the New York Stock Exchange. So there is a story behind every single company, even the smaller ones. Now, Suntech decided to invest in Italy through, not through a subsidiary. They had subsidiaries all over the world, even in Italy, but they decided to create a fund. Where? In Luxembourg. Why? It's easy to guess. Anyway, even the fund in Luxembourg has several different stories. It was controlled by Suntech Power Holdings directly and not directly. It was about the 80%. And then the founder of Suntech Power Holdings was based in the Cayman Islands. The founder had another company based in the British Virgin Islands and controlled about the 11%. And then there was another guy that was a former partner of Suntech, a Spanish guy, who controlled another company in Singapore, holding about the 10% of this company. And this is how it looked like, actually. And in order to shape this chaos, that's why we met Mar and all the other guys at ICIJ, in order to understand what was going on. It was a really hard story, and as James said, it's really frustrating because you have to control line by line with legal advisor in order to check that everything is good. And what else to say? We can show.
Well, I did show like some of the. Well, you can go back to the map. Yeah. Well, maybe as Mar was saying before, you can go back to the map at home. But like as we were saying, this is like the main holding in the Cayman, and then you got this is the fund in Luxembourg, and this is the British Virgin Island-based company controlled by the Chinese ex-CEO, like the founder of Suntech, Xi Zhengrong. Then we got the second, this is like a new company in Luxembourg that was open to then control this one. Then we got the Singapore-based company controlled by the Spanish top manager of Suntech Adventure in Italy. And then, again, these other companies that are now closed. And the interesting part is that we got this Via Alessandro Farnese 4, which is an address in Rome, and is the address where most of these Italian companies were registered at, and is where the intermediates, the Italian intermediates that Suntech needed in order to invest in Italy and buy all these companies from, had registered the companies at. So even like when you go to Via Alessandro Farnese in the Italian Chamber of Commerce, you will have much more companies registered at. So we even had to take all that bunch of data and just kind of divide which are the companies controlled by Suntech, which are not. And we had like this very long set of data on that. And then we came up with this map. I don't know if you want to add something more on the intermediates.
Yeah, actually, the intermediates, they basically both these tens and tens of companies in Italy through a couple of Italian businessmen that were related in some way to other investigations. The big one, actually, is the one about the king of wind energy, Vito Nicastri. It was quite famous for being allegedly on the payroll of Matteo Messina Denaro.
So we're over. Yeah, just very quickly, we didn't say maybe very clearly what was the fraud, but the prosecutors in Apulia allegedly said that Suntech, through all these intermediates and structure we just showed, built many solar fields that were not according to the Italian law, were not built legally, and in this way they will obtain funds, like public funding that Italy gives to the solar energy for millions. And according to prosecutors, they already had taken, like stolen 6 million euros, and if they weren't stopped by the prosecutor office, they could go on for 20 years and get like 300 millions. This is what the story that we discovered, and you can read on the website. As Gianluca was saying, it's complex, and we have here a whole bunch of connected stories that falls into Malta, so another offshore and tax haven place.
Great. Well, we were meant to finish at 1:30, but because we were late, we want to open up for questions for now for 10 or 15 minutes. If you can go over there to give them the mics. In the meantime, while the mic gets there, this is not over. We've been working on this for over 2 years. We've published many stories. As I was saying at the beginning, we've worked with more than 100 reporters in around 60 countries. We keep working. We're actively working right now with more reporters. And I guess the key to all of you here in the audience, or those of you that are watching this online, is that we have the Offshoreleaks database up there that you can try to see what you can find. Basically, you could do this 2 ways: by hit and miss and put in names that you find and you like, or we actually made the data available to download. So there's several CSVs, several spreadsheets that could be downloaded, and you can actually try to massively, for example, match that list of names with the list of some interesting people in your country and try to see if you find any connections. And if you do, just let us know. You can reach me afterwards or go to, shoot us an email at contact@icij.org, and we can try to establish, if you're a reporter, we can try to establish a collaboration agreement, and then we could give you access to the 2.5 million files. Please. Oh, please, go.
My name is Sonia. I'm not sure. For sure, I know that I want to congratulate you for what you did, because, I mean, such a big amount of competence, knowledge, perseverance, it's really amazing. So thank you very much for this kind of findings that you gave us. And then I have a couple of questions, but I'm not sure about the questions, because, you know, this is extremely interesting, but I also feel, I don't know about the others, but I also feel very small now, very scared also, because I don't know what to do. I mean, as a citizen, I mean, this is complex stuff. And I wonder if there is a way to give to the people kind of simple story of all these that is quite complex, and also a solution. I mean, what we should do day by day. How can we make them stop this bullshit? How can, and then I also wonder, and this is why I'm looking at the two young guys there, if in the other countries, maybe there is more sensibility, maybe there is more interest in this, and maybe people react better, because I mean, what do you want me to do? What should I do? What can I do to stop this? Thank you.
I guess I'll take that. Hi, thanks very much. I think, I mean, firstly, you know, however big, however complicated all of this is, and however rich and powerful the people kind of chasing it are, you know, for all that this had 100 sort of reporters and so on, you know, we had a little guy versus who were investigating. You know, they have all of this money, all of this influence, all of this secrecy, and a whole bunch of us, a lot of whom didn't know really much, or in some cases anything about offshore as we started, have managed to unpick all of it. And so I think one thing is, you know, we shouldn't underestimate ourselves, any of us. We can unmask this kind of stuff, and that's a really good first step. I think internationally there has been some action on this. The authorities in the US, the UK and Australia are doing pretty much their first ever joint investigation into kind of a lot of what's been found on this. And there have been calls for sort of changes to some of the international rules. I should say Britain is one of the really big villains here. And there are currently proposals being suggested that would improve lots of the secrecy aspects of this. I think, you know, within the EU, within other institutions, more pressure can be put on Britain, because a lot of the tax havens are actually overseas territories of the UK. Beyond that, I think as journalists, we kind of have a duty to try and, as well as going into the intricacies and the sort of the individual cases, we do have to try and communicate and explain this stuff as simply as we can, so people who aren't already interested in offshore or tax dodging or other things get interested. I think we have to try and involve the general audience, and that's when political pressure or civic action can happen. And I think that's when we can all do something. You know, individually, there's not much any of us can do about this. But, you know, whether it's contributing to campaign groups, whether it's writing to politicians and so on, if we are part of a crowd, we can do a lot. Kind of like the ICIJ, I guess.
And let me add to that, actually, to what he was saying, is one thing we didn't mention, too many things to mention over 2 years to try to condense it in 1 hour and a little bit, is the impact these stories had. And just to mention, for example, the EU tax commissioner said that the European Commission had been trying to push for tax reform for a long time. And they were finding some member states, Luxembourg, Austria, that were trying to block every single negotiation in this regard. And after we published, we basically, and thanks to the fact that we published all at the same time, everybody was talking about this. It became a topic of conversation that shifted the focus to this topic again, which was kind of like forgotten at that point. And the European Tax Commissioner actually said that Offshoreleaks has been a trigger for tax reform again in Europe. Also, the OECD has since then tried to review their transparency policies and the transparency standards. So that's part of the things that James was mentioned. And for example, right after we published, the tax havens and the offshore world became, again, a topic to discuss on the table at the G8 and the G20. And then in certain countries, there have been certain things happening. So for example, people resigning in Mongolia, or one of the main bankers of Austria resigning after our Austrian partner published that he had connections to the offshore world and offshore companies that he had not disclosed as he was supposed to. So there have been several things happening. Actually, I would say a lot of things happening. Even in South Korea, the tax authorities are actually searching the Offshoreleaks database to actually find who are the South Koreans, to cross-check with their records, those records that we don't have access to, but they do, the tax agencies do, and try to find whether they were evading taxes. And they have recovered millions of dollars so far in evaded taxes. So I guess that's one of the things we try to do is, as I was saying in another panel, at ICIJ we do stories based on three things. Is it an issue of global concern? Are we exposing a system that is meant to protect people and is broken? And the third thing is, are we likely to get a result? And this is what we try to do, is to expose a system that is broken and try to get a result. And we are very happy with the impact it got so far because of these things. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, have I turned it off? The one thing I would like to add is, the reason it changes is because it's being forced to change. I mean, the HMRC sat on this data for 2 years and did nothing with it. For accountants and lawyers who deal in offshore, it's a joke, it's a game. Like, you bring out a new law and they just find a way to get around it. And it is a game. They don't take it seriously, and particularly if you're wealthy, the HMRC will always opt for taking a payment, even if it's not the full payment. So I mean, the thing with Vodafone, where they evaded, they had billions, I mean, 10 billion or something in profits offshore, and they made a nominal payment and they got away with it. I mean, I don't know how the fuck you're supposed to impose laws on anybody when the countries who, the organizations in these countries who are supposed to punish people, they don't do it. I mean, if you can make a profit from tax evasion, why not? So changing that is what is important, and you can change the laws, but until there's a punishment, it doesn't seem to make any difference. But that's a personal view, and perhaps somebody.
I'm sure that these guys also want to answer to that question, but we're running out of time, so we're going to get the one or two who had questions, the two questions that were remaining, and then we're going to do kind of like a joint response to all of you.
Hello everybody. Ciao Cecilia. Ciao. You're touching very hot stuff. I wonder if you have special protections to your email accounts, to your data that you keep in your laptops, in your Google Drives or whatever, because everything we know is vulnerable.
Great. Can you move the mic to...
Already
you have another one? Okay.
Hello.
Shoot.
Hi. My name is Antonio. I worked in China as a correspondent until last year. And I was very curious how the whole case could be connected somehow to the political scandals that happened in China the year before, especially like the Boshilai case, and right now we have the Zhou Yongkang case, which is ongoing. So basically these are two very important Chinese leaders who were under investigation, and one of them was prosecuted. Do you think that somehow there was an interest of some sectors of the Chinese Communist Party to leak off those informations to damage some other sectors of the Chinese Communist Party itself? This is my question.
Great. Who wants to answer to, I mean, I have answers, but I don't want to talk. So do you want to say something about like security, for example?
I would say that in this very case, I mean, from our side at least, we kind of followed the teaching of another center of investigative journalism, which we have lots of respect about, which is OCCRP. And as Miranda yesterday was saying, the best protection is being a good journalist and talk to everybody. Like, talk to the people you are bringing allegations against. And for the verse, I think this was, at least for us, like the best result hasn't been just publishing and doing a story with them, which has been great, but has also been the fact that for the very first time, certain people involved decided to talk to journalists. It was the very first time Javier Romero decided, who was the Spanish manager of Suntech in doing the Italian push, so to say, decided to speak to journalists. It was the very first time some of the Italian people involved were even asked by journalists to give their own opinion on what happened. So I think that's the best protection on one side. On the other side is how do you deal with data? Well, the ICIJ part that they should answer it, but from our side, definitely you do use some tools that thankfully we have, like encryption and keep your data safe. But then if somebody wants to break in your house, they just can, of course. But yeah, you do. I mean, in terms of data protection, we have high security. In terms of personal security, not, but I don't think we are risking anything.
Do you guys want to answer something about security?
I would say, I don't want to talk too much. I would say that in the beginning of Offshoreleaks, they were pushing, because it was kind of post-WikiLeaks, and there was a lot of pushing for PGP, and they had this system in the beginning, and it just didn't work. It was complicated and cumbersome because they are. I mean, the PGP is not easy. It's not you have to learn it. And in the end, I mean, there was a secure forum, which was useful and necessary. But in the end, people were just openly emailing, because you have to do threat analysis. And in Offshoreleaks, the enemy isn't NSA, it's not the state. You're essentially on the same side. So all these tools are wonderful and they really work when you need them to, but they can be debilitating if you employ them when you don't need them.
So I feel like I should try and at least quickly address that comment. And I think one thing that we should note on this is the Chinaleaks material came from exactly the same material that came to Gerard Riles several years before, and was absolutely mixed up in the other stuff. The kind of distinct, separate sort of context of it was a journalistic decision by the ICIJ rather than anything else. I think an interesting sign on that is, of course, it's a very big political sort of campaign of sorts at the moment in China from